Great. So thank you for inviting me here today. I wasn't invited for my day job to lecture. We have more prestigious academics here, starting with Carol, but also Andrew and Sitkin's not here, and yourself, Julie. I was invited here because despite my accent, I'm a counselor in London. I'm a counselor in Enfield. So I'll ask you to look past my accent. And basically, I think I'm the warm-up act because I have other friends from Enfield who are here and will be speaking later in the day. My friend Del Goddard, he's our cabinet lead for Regeneration, and he'll be speaking later in the day. And Neil Roussel's our director for Regeneration, and you will be speaking also, correct? So I'm the warm-up act. I'm the warm-up act. I'm about how our experiment started, because Carol referred to us as a living experiment. So look at me as a lab rat, as a guinea pig, okay? So the way to start is with a bit of historical background. You might have guessed, I'm Labour Party. I'm not. We took over Enfield in 2010. I've actually only been a councillor since that time, unlike Dale has been a councillor since 1492. When we arrived in power in 2010, after 8 years of conservatism, and actually more appropriately after 30 years of neoliberalism, Enfield wasn't doing well. In fact, I'm probably not being disloyal to say that Enfield is not doing well. We've had unemployment rates in Enfield which have been X number of points above the London average and the national average for many, many years, actually for several decades. So, I mean, it is to a certain extent a tale of two cities. There's green and leafy Western Enfield, where people are doing just fine. And so when you're speaking about the distribution as much as growth, that's a very sensitive point to Labour in Enfield, because green and leafy West Enfield, where the Tories get their votes, is doing just fine, thank you. In the Labour heartlands, East Enfield is an old industrial district, probably the southern equivalent of what I see looking out the window here. We had many, many industries, which Dale will be able to speak probably in more detail than I can, but many of them have gone bust. Attributed to different reasons. I tend to attribute to Thatcherism, but of course I would do that. In any event, we arrive at power, and we have a problem. And the problem is unemployment, which reaches up to well above 20% in many of our constituencies in East Enfield. And at that point, the question is, as they say, what to do. And the first possibility is just to fall in line with the ambient discourse coming out of central government, kind of satisfy yourself with the idea of working through local enterprise partnerships, etc., etc. But we had a very, very strong sense that if we were to repeat the sort of light touch economic interventionism which has marked the paradigm for the last 30 years, that was, Einstein said, if you repeat the same mistake again and again, that's the definition of insanity. So we had a very strong sense that we needed to do something different because we had a problem and it really wasn't being resolved. So what happened was that our leader, our mutual leader, and the CEO of Enfield Council, possibly because of my day job, they knew I knew a few people in academia, and they asked me to go out and get quote-unquote intellectual firepower. Because one part of our story is the fact that we have a definite lack of resources at the council level. It's not as if you can sit there and say, well, we have a problem, let's allocate 7 intelligent economists to study it. We don't have that many people to do that. So we need some brain power from outside the council, and to Robert's credit and Doug's credit, they recognize that we need to bring in people. And I've known Carol and Sukdev and Andrew and Julie from Gampy's out Paris. I've known them for 10 years and under other circumstances. So I gave them a bell, sent an email to Carol and said, help, can you come in? And Carol said he likes lab rats. He was looking for a guinea pig. So he came in, and it was fantastic. He came in, had a first meeting. We set out our problems. You were pretty familiar with our problems. It's a fairly classical problem of a deindustrialized, ex-industrial district. They went away, the Crest people, and they came back, and I never forget when they came back, because at first we didn't know how this was going to pan out. And they came back with 18 suggestions, policy suggestions, 12 of which were adoptable. If you think about that, you're going from a situation where you have no idea what they're going to say to you, where all of a sudden they give you 12 strong, feasible policy actions. So we were quite pleased. I mean, the first thing was to bring new ideas on board, some of which fit with our Labour view of the world. But anyway, we're going to happen when that occurred. So at that juncture, the decision was made fairly quickly to consolidate and concretize this new direction is what we ended up calling it. It's kind of a terrible name. But to concretize it and make it into a project team. And the project team has been launched in the regeneration department, but as you will see, including by some of the sectors to which Carol referred to when he was speaking, it crosses over into a lot of the other departments. And indeed, that's part of our story, is the way in which these experiments cannot be conducted by one department alone. Okay? So the project team was up and running, and we decided out of the 12 suggestions that Carol and Sukdev and others came up with, we decided that you need to classify them according to the ease with which they could be attacked. Okay? Because there's a certain, when a new initiative comes up like this, there's a concern that people will be very excited at first and then they'll run out of steam. So you need to ensure a quick victory early on to keep people focused, to keep the enthusiasm going. So basically we divided our work streams into low-lying fruit, medium-term projects, and long-term projects. Right? Because patience and impatience is, as I say, to keep the enthusiasm going, it's a key part of this whole effort. So we decided that the low-lying fruit, the area where we could get the quickest win to show that this new direction was something worth following, was what we are incorrectly referring to as corporate social responsibility. But in reality, I'd like to call it new relationships with big businesses. And I don't need to belabor this point because Carol just spoke quite a long time about value extraction, but it is that analysis. And you look at, as you referred to, the foundational sectors, so that would be what, food industries, retailers, that would be energy, keeping your house warm, so that's the utilities, and actually banks because, well, for reasons we'll refer to later. We identified those sectors and as to use your vocabulary, as organizing a value extraction from Enfield. It's a certain sort of mercantile analysis, but basically we decided that if Enfield had borders, the People's Republic of Enfield, how much of a corporation may be British, but if the money was making Enfield was being taken out of Enfield, that was aggravating our demise. So we started with the utilities. So those are the three sectors, and we started with utilities. Why? Because fuel poverty is a grave concern, because I'm also sustainability scrutiny. We're all very sensitive to those issues. We were also engaging money in our housing stock anyway through the Decent Homes program, so it seemed more efficient to engage with utilities at the very same time. And here's the analysis we did on the back of the cigarette pack. By the way, we did this for other sectors. In the speech I showed before, we did this for banking sector, retail sector, and also for utility sector. To make a long story short, I went through the balance sheets of the big 6 utilities, and I think we threw in Thames Water as well. This is about 2 years back, which is why the balance sheets are back from 2011. I went through the balance sheets, looked at their operating profits, used different postulates to pro-rata calculation of what they were probably making in Enfield in dealings with the residents of Enfield. And you come up with a number which is fairly astronomical in just 1 year compared to, now when I say the reason we chose operating profit is because that includes whatever labor spending that is being done in Enfield or elsewhere. And we know that with the exception of Eon, which employs a few people locally, none of the other companies were employing workers in Enfield to do work in Enfield. And I'd like to say that again. None of the other companies were employing workers from Enfield to do work in Enfield. And that is kind of the crux of our problem. We identified that. So all we were getting from them was no jobs. They're making profits out of Enfield. We're getting a little bit of token CSR. I mean, it's nice, but it's fairly token compared to the scale of the extraction of value from Enfield. So what do? You call them in. Now, we don't have time, and Julie said I only have 15 minutes. But, this is the country of Adam Smith. And left-wing, right-wing parties, forget my accent. I lived in France for a lot of years. My wife is German. I am from a culture where the state sector interacts very intimately with the private sector and has no compunctions about doing that. Here in the UK, obviously not the Tories, it's not their worldview, but not even Labour, certainly not New Labour, would engage with the private sector, they would always doff forelocks and cap in hands and that whole sort of attitude. And it's nuts. It makes absolutely no sense with me. We have a problem with the private sector. It's not fulfilling certain responsibilities that we needed to fulfill in modern society. So you call them in and you read them the Riot Act. Okay, and that was fun. I enjoyed that a lot. It was like, you know, you call people in. And here's the way it went. We called in the 6 utilities. I think it was 2 summers ago. And it was Achilles and me, a friend of mine. You call them in. And very simply, 2 or 3 of them said, it's not me, Gov. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. And they just, you know, walked out. And that's fine. And 1 or 2 said, well, I'd like to help you, but I don't control my own supply chains. You'll have to speak to whoever does my work for me, and it's not me, Gov. Okay? But in the end, I mean, the arguments we used were big, good cop, bad cop, name and fame, name and shame, which is why I refer to it as CSR, because those are generally CSR techniques. What we said to the companies was this. I mean, how much leverage does a little local council have over British Gas, have over EDF? Not enormous, but we blagged it. You know, it's negotiation. You know? So we would sit there and say, right, well, if you're nice to us and you give us local jobs for local work, well, then we will name and fame you, we will praise you to high heaven in whatever press releases we have coming out of Enfield, that whole CSR thing. And of course, if you don't, we will not only praise your rivals, but we will damn you by silence, because we couldn't really say to them, we would denounce them, but we... Now, even more concretely, and I think Dell's can speak in this in greater detail, the whole use of procurement, the council, in Enfield Council, about I suppose all the local councils, they do have one strong weapon at their disposal, which is that we spend a lot. We spend a lot. We have hundreds of millions of pounds going through our accounts every year. And we can threaten and possibly even follow through on the idea that if a large corporation does not play ball with us, does not hire local workers for local work, that when we are putting out for our procurement contracts, we will tend to favor the corporation that does play ball with us. And trust me, we brought that into the conversation. In the end, British Gas bit. Okay, and that's why British, well, in the end, British Gas bit. They said, go on then. And that was a very happy day when that happened. Okay, now, why did British Gas do that? Because they're feeling guilty, because they're getting bad press all the time? I don't care. You know, I'm not in the business of psychoanalyzing British Gas's guilt feelings. Basically, we wanted a commitment from them that they would spend, the money that would be spent in Enfield would involve hiring local Enfield people. They said yes, and that's the first, basically that's our first early win. Now, we have much, much bigger ambitions, which we knew were going to take longer to achieve. And actually, Carol started to refer to them. The idea of moving beyond putting pressure on an outside corporation, which we consider the low-lying fruit, the idea of us starting up ventures where Enfield Council takes an equity stake in a commercial venture, we're there. We're working on that, we're moving on that. Energy, housing, market gardening, which is basically agribusiness. We're looking about taking stakes, some actually taking 100% stakes actually, in some of these equity ventures. Now necessarily, they take a longer period of time than pressuring British Gas. So in terms of our current wins, I can speak of that short-term win. But the long-term, I mean, the early success created enormous enthusiasm inside of our council. And we learned certain lessons from that. Okay? We learned, and I divide the lessons this slide and the next slide. The first lesson we learned is that it's one thing to get a big company to say, go on them, I will hire local Enfield people. It's another thing for Enfield SMEs to be ready to go, right? And we've had to allocate one of Neil's officers into ongoing relationships with local SMEs to try to G them up. It's a whole animal spirits thing, because if you're a small SME and you have theoretically the idea that British Gas will hire you down the road if, for example, you get accredited. But of course, getting accredited costs you money, because you got to send your workers to the local FE college, which is also something that we coordinated, right? But then they're sitting there saying, man, okay, so I have to spend some money up front now to hire people now, and then train them up now, and then supposedly down the road, I think I'm going to get a British Gas contract. And one of the things that we discovered is that even if you have a council dynamic and entrepreneurial as we are, you don't the SMEs don't necessarily follow. And it's a very simple thing. I shouldn't even be talking about SMEs here. I should be talking about micro-enterprises. SMEs may be used to the ideas of scaling up, but a lot of the, utilities, we're talking about construction sector, and that's a lot of the work in retrofitting. A lot of them is what, Joe the plumber? Joe the plumber works alone, maybe has one van, but we're asking Joe the plumber to hire 3 people. And that, all of a sudden, there's a bit of hesitation. So it's one thing for us to do the work we've done, but we've had some follow-up work to implement it. One other implementation job that we've had to do also is to make sure that the banks will lend Joe the plumber the working capital that Joe or Josephine the plumber need to start to G up, to scale up, to the point where they can take advantage of the British Gas offer. So when you were speaking earlier about banking as being yet another sector where we need to have work to do, absolutely. So we've actually I've moved on from really the Riot Act to the utilities. I've actually called an HSBC, Handelsbanken, we had come in, and then speaking to the credit union. And we're also trying to work simultaneously with the banking sector. We've organized, I call it speed dating loving, but that's kind of my California background. It's 11 with SMEs on one side and banks on the other. And I'm not necessarily very confident we're going to solve it, because nationally there's this whole discourse about banks not lending to industries. And how can we solve this at Enfield if we don't solve it nationwide? But we are trying. Okay. So one of the lessons, 2 of the lessons are external economic, and I saw you looking at your watch. So here you go. The other lesson, and I'm almost done. The other lesson is internal, and it's about our institutional culture. Okay. And there's 2 or 3 things to say about this. One, you saw the first slide was referred to Sir Humphrey. Yes, Minister, Sir Humphrey exists. That's amazing for me. I mean, you guys know this, you've been in the council longer than me. But there is a need for us to empower council officers with a sense of entrepreneurialism. And there's a whole work which is being done along those lines, and it is a long-ish process. And Neil, you might speak about, you're going to speak about it a little bit because it's been part of your work. And very simply, some of our officers have taken it to like fish to water. Some of our officers, they've jumped on board with the idea that the council, look, the council, we have such budget cuts. I mean, we're going to be down 40%-ish within 4 years of George Osborne taking power. Enfield Council, 4 or 5 years after Osborne taking power, it's going to be about 60% of what it was before. So we can't do business the old way. The only way for us to continue to survive is for council officers almost to act like, entrepreneurs. And as I was saying, that there's a whole cultural aspect there. Some take to it, others don't take to it. Number 1. Number 2, I have to talk about jealousy very quickly. Because we've had some success with British Gas, and actually I can't say the name, but there's another utility who's apparently coming on board also in a similar way. Because we've had some success, all of a sudden, defeat is orphaned, but victory is many parents. You're getting certain people are jumping on bandwagon within the council, but that's confusing the message, because we have some people who are on board because they have the whole new directions idea in mind and they want to be entrepreneurial. Other people just want to be associated with a winning effort within the council. So we're having to juggle within the council the division of labor between different departments. And that's not the big picture, but in our little world, it's part of the story, okay? And that's it, basically. So going forward, onwards and upwards, as I said, we'll continue putting pressure on big corporations, but to a certain extent, I think we're going to be moving on pretty soon. In fact, I know we are moving on pretty soon. We're already going on to the medium-term, long-term initiatives, which are actually bigger stories. They're bigger wins, but they take longer to set up. So we're looking to start an energy company. We have an incinerator on the North Circular in Edmonton. We're going to put a cap in it. Instead of the heat being exuded into the atmosphere, we're going to capture the steam, sell steam. Maybe the Spurs if we're lucky, one with somebody else. But we're going to try to sell steam. So we call it the Enfield Light Orchestra. We have a huge ambition for building and managing houses in our name. Let me say that again, in our name. And that's new directions. The fact that we're doing it in our name is exactly what you're speaking about. And here's my final comment, is that for us to succeed in a lot of these efforts, we need, when we go knocking the door of private companies, either because we want something from them, or maybe because we want to partner with them as a co-equity holder in one of these commercial ventures. I've been spoken about agribusiness. We're going to build greenhouses everywhere. We need partners. But when we knock on their doors, we need to be credible. We can't have them think that it's a loony left Californian who's jumped in there with some experimental ideas. They have to understand that there's serious economics behind this. And I stand by the economics, but one of the ways for us to succeed is for our approach to be legitimized. One of the ways for our approach to be legitimized is for you to help. All right? We need people to understand that there is a different way in which economic policy can be done, be it at the national level, but I'm not the national level guy, I'm a local level guy. So there's different ways economic policy can be done. We're not obliged to keep on repeating the same neoliberal mistakes of the last 30 years. As that other guy said, yes we can, right? You remember that? So I mean, we need to speak at events like this, and we need microphones. And for example, we're working with a small newspaper called the Manchester Guardian in the hope that they will look at us as being serious actors. And basically, we are serious actors, and I hope you take it as such. So thank you very much.